calling our first episode of Living with the Tobeys. We've had a little bit of a historic discovery, and this discovery has been going on for about 9 years now, since 2010. And it's led us on a journey. It's led us to a point where we are dealing with archaeologists, we're dealing with historians, and in some cases attorneys and accountants. This discovery has been something that's, I don't want to say been completely consuming, but the Tobey name, the Tobey family, is something that's part of our own vernacular now. My name is Tom Keys. I live in the town of Sandwich, Massachusetts, here on Cape Cod. And in 2010, I guess I get a little bored, easy. I got married in 96 to my wonderful wife, Melissa. We built a house in 1996 here in Sandwich. But I guess I was getting a little itchy. We were in that house for 15 years. And a friend of mine is a realtor. And just through a discussion, she says, oh, there's a house for sale in downtown Sandwich, which I've always admired downtown Sandwich. I've always loved history and historic items and artifacts. So I went to look at this house. It's dated 1817. It's kind of a rambling colonial, but nobody had lived in it for 15 years, and it's fallen into serious disrepair. But it's sitting on 2.5 acres, right on the pond in downtown, very walkable to everything. So I went to look, just walking around the outside with my friend, the realtor. I walked away. I said, this is a mess. I'm out. So I went home, and it got stuck in my head. And about 2 weeks later, I called up my friend Beverly again. I said, well, let me just take a look at the inside. So again, on a weekend, I went inside, and the inside was worse than the outside. We have ourselves a house that's in deplorable condition on the outside, worse condition on the inside, and I walk away again. So I'd say about 2 weeks go by, and this house somehow got stuck in my head. It's a charming house. It's 1817. I've always wanted to restore an antique home. So we start talking about price. Start dealing with the owners. There was a passing, so now it's in the hands of people that really don't have connection to the house. And we got to a negotiation where it's now kind of plausible. It's kind of real. Thinking, well, if I get it for that, I can put some money into restoring it and have a wonderful place to have my wife and our 2 young children move into. So now we have a problem. I've kind of fallen a little bit in love with this house, and I haven't told my wife yet. And we have a 1-year-old, and at that time, a 4.5-year-old. So I got brave enough to mention to my wife that I'm looking at this antique house in downtown Sandwich, of course using the ruse that it's a great place to raise our kids. It's got sidewalks, we can walk, for pizza and ice cream and do all the family things. So I kind of sold it a bit. So she agreed to come over and look at it. We looked at it. She gave me the hairy eyeball because she hadn't even been in the house yet, and the outside's a mess. I brought her inside, and now she's just staring at me. So I said, but it's an older house. It's got some false walls. We can open this up. It's not historically significant. We can change a few things. And somehow, I like to think that I love historic houses, and I think, or at least I still hope, my wife loves me. And she used the term, she borrowed my vision. And we bought it. So we bought this house. We were going to stay in our other house for a year, restore this one, and then move in. Well, as anything, when you're restoring an old house, everybody knows it's never what you're thinking you're going to run into. So we have the contractor here, and the upstairs of the house is interesting because the ceiling is 6'1". Problem is I am 6'1". My head rubbed everywhere upstairs, all the bedrooms, the hallway. But I knew these ceilings were false. They were dropped and plastered, and we could lift them up. So while I was off Cape, the contractor tore down the ceiling in one of the upstairs bedrooms, and they found hand-hewn beams. They weren't hand-hewing or hand-cutting beams in 1817. They would have had water saws and other opportunities. So I come back on Cape and I've got my camera and I'm taking pictures, and I don't know what I'm looking at, but I do know it's old. So at this point, we sent the pictures to, not even sent, to a local historian who got me in touch with a local archaeologist. So now it's the following Saturday. He walks in, the upstairs is bombed out. First thing he ever said to me, this is a gentleman named David Wheelock. He's been a historic archaeologist for 40 years. He says, uh-oh. And up we go into the attic. And now he's naming purlins and all kinds of other, timber frame structural methodologies. That means nothing to me. And he says, well, at this point, I would say it's a 9.9 out of 10 for preservation. I said, what? And he goes, at this point, I would say it's easily pre-1650. Well, my jaw dropped when I was sitting in the attic, and I said to him, can you tell Melissa? And he says, nope, that's your problem. Because now we've bought an old house that we knew there were challenges getting it restored. And now we've got a very old house. It's actually classified post-medieval that now needs a preservation. So that's where this all starts. So now here we are, restoring the house, taking down a few false walls, opening up some beams. We have exposed 17th century beams on the downstairs, 17th century beams on the upstairs, and we find that there's been 9 additions to this house. It doesn't make sense, but it's wonderful. It's all done now. But now it doesn't make sense to us because here's a house that in the 17th century, pretty much every house faced due south. And that was so that when the sun came up, it would warm the front, keep the cool in the back for the kitchen or the hall. And this house is not. It's actually facing pretty much east. Well, why is that? So Mr. Wheelock comes over and he brings another archaeologist with him, and they start doing some, they call it material culture test holes in my yard. Which was interesting because as each hole was happening around the house, they were tearing up the lawn. So I had to fix it. So I got yelled at again. But that's all right. It's been fixed. Now, the material culture that they pulled out of the ground showed that there was occupation here on this property from about 1800 to today. They're finding nails and pottery and little bits that show habitation. But the house is pre-1650. So that doesn't make sense. But that does coincide with why people thought this house was 1817. But we have a mystery. What happened at the Barnstable County Deeds Office is there was a big fire, maybe about 150 years ago. And it wiped out a lot of the early documents on Cape Cod. Certain towns got wiped out. So as they were trying to replicate these documents, they got to a point of 1817. There's a lot of houses in the area that are misidentified. This one obviously being one of them. So we have the history of the house from 1817 to today, who lived in it, but we have nothing prior. So we're missing a lot of time, almost 200 years. So the material culture that they're pulling out of the ground told us one thing. Then they did a test hole right next to the house at the foundation. And as they dug down, you'll see in the picture that it's a loose, cobbled foundation. There's no basement underneath this house. And that's how they were doing it around 1800, 1817. That makes sense. So again, we can see that the foundation is from the early 1800s. There's a Cape Cod cellar in the back, a round, shallow round in the back. All make sense for 1817. But the beams and the structure, we even had dendrochronology that was sent over to England that proved this house is mid-17th century at some point. Where'd this house come from? We now have a mystery because it doesn't belong here. We have an older structure that's been moved. So as we bombed out the upstairs of the house, Mr. Wheelock went around, he was looking at all the beams, and he discovered there's a pin in 2 of the back corner beams. And this pin went all the way through to the addition on the back of the house, the lean-to part of the back. So it was linchpinned, holes was drilled, metal rod driven through, and then it was keyed. So you can see that this house was moved here. It was keyed, brought together, probably around 1800. But again, where did it come from? We still don't know. So this property has a mystery. Where did it come from? Why is this house here? Why is it situated pointing in the wrong direction? We think because, well, that was the federal period where people were trying to have more of a streetscape, so it makes sense. And now you see in the title, we're living with the Tobeys. So who are the Tobeys? Well, it's taken us a couple of years to figure that out because there's no records. So we had to do a lot of looking at deeds transactions, looking at births and marriages in town, and looking at wills. And we found a will that it's amazing. It's like a roadmap describing this house and how it got divided up and what happened. So we do believe, it's pretty clear, that this is Thomas Tobeys' original house. Another part is there's multiple Tobey properties all along Water Street where this house is. So, Thomas Tobeys' original house, again, but where was it? Where was it situated? We still don't know. So as we're studying the Tobeys, we're finding out that Thomas Tobey was very much a man around town. He was a former selectman for the town of Sandwich, coincidentally. I was a former selectman for the town of Sandwich. He set the bounds between Sandwich and Barnstable. He was responsible for dividing the whales, because where Sandwich is on Cape Cod Bay, all whales, if there was a carcass, would wash up on the beaches of Sandwich because of currents. And between the native population and at that time the English population, they'd be fighting over it. So Thomas Tobey was responsible for dividing the whales amongst the inhabitants of the area. So he was a person that had access, means. And we're seeing just from the house that although the house was originally a 12.4 by 18 structure, we're standing in it right now, the original house was a one-room cottage with a garret or an attic above it. That's it. And as Thomas Tobey, who had multiple children, well, as more children come, more additions were put on the house. But the original house, the 12.4 by 18, is still here. And at least the archaeologists and historians we dealt with, they say they haven't seen another one of this size, of this structure, that survived. Because why would it? Well, it's been encased in another house, so it's still here. So we've had a chance to open it up, and well, it became a very livable house. We're very happy to be here, but we still have a challenge. And the challenge is, where did it come from, and what are we going to do now with this? Well, I told you earlier that we bought this house in 2010. It's now 2019. And we've been working on this discovery for many years, and it's led us on a huge path to the point where we started a nonprofit. We're now going to start this, which is going to be a periodic show, because we've now gone to many historic committees, many men's clubs and women's clubs and Boy Scouts to give the story of what's happened at this property. It's an amazing find. And instead of just rehashing it every time, we're going to put a series together on these discoveries. And I believe these discoveries are going to last my lifetime because they are never ending. So, here we are. Great house, great spot. Happy to be here. We have a mystery, and now we want to share it with everybody. So at this point, I'm just going to say, tune in to the second episode, and you're going to find out what we believe is where this house actually came from. It's a fun discovery. You'll get to meet my family, all the trials and tribulations that's come along with this. It's been a fun journey, and it's only just begun. So, till next time.